Okay, it looks like we are live. So, hello everybody. I just want you guys all to know that we can see the comments. So, if there's anything that anybody wants us to particularly touch on or elaborate more on, or there's questions that come up, please feel free to drop them in the comments, and we will certainly answer them. So I am super excited to be here on a Sunday with these two awesome women. It's very exciting. I'm Anna, and I know that most of you guys know me, but I'm a family doctor, I'm a mom, and I'm the founder of the Anti-Fragile Female MD. And so basically what brought me here is I found myself burned out and suicidal last fall. And the principles that I was learning in life coaching really actually helped save my life and my career. And so I found myself compelled, I should say, to share this work with others. And that's what prompted me to start my coaching business. And along the way, I met these other beautiful ladies who we sort of bonded in some overlapping areas of our journeys. And basically, where I'm at now is I am running the Anti-Fragile Female MD. And so I focus on teaching women, physicians, to recognize and to overcome burnout, imposter syndrome, and perfectionism, and to respond to their inner critics with confidence and with self-compassion. And so, my tagline of my business is I like to teach women to thrive in any circumstance. And so I think it will become more apparent as we go on throughout this talk, really what I mean when I say that. And so without further ado, I should say, I'm going to turn things over to these two lovely gals here, Melissa Kwak and Erica Roesche, who are joining me. And I'll let them tell you a little bit about what they do and their stories as well. Mel, do you want to start?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'm a family physician, and I'm still working full-time as a family physician. About 3 years ago, I had kind of hit the peak or maybe the trough of my burnout. I had been feeling what I call burnout for a couple of years. And about 3 years ago, got to the point where I was like, I just need to find something to help me here. And for me, burnout was, to sum it up, it was just feeling like I didn't feel like myself. Like I'd become someone who I didn't recognize, especially in that cynical aspect of that definition of burnout. That isn't me at my core. And burnout was also a feeling of exhaustion and just going through the motions. For me, I was also telling everyone I was fine. That was part of mine, was I'm fine, and just putting on the happy face and pretending everything was good. But inside, I kept thinking, this can't be all there is to life. Like it just can't be after all this work and looking forward to this life as a doctor, and it just can't be. So about 3 years ago, I actually met with a psychiatrist, and then about 9 months later, I found the life coach who ended up helping me with my burnout, and I then became certified in her coach certification program as well. And that's Brooke Castillo and the life coach school, because she and her work had helped me so much. I had no clue I could come out the other side of burnout feeling as empowered and alive, and just a sense of okayness, like everything's going to be okay. I didn't know that was possible. And so I came out the other side feeling that much better. I wanted to share that with other people too. So as part of my journey, I came up with a business I've called Physicians Inspired, with my goal being to coach physicians who are burned out. In the process of doing so, I found myself dipping back into those symptoms of burnout again. And I think maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later in our talk here. But so I still have that business, and I still see myself most likely doing more and more of that in my future. But it's not something I'm hugely growing right now, as I'm digging deeper into this experience of burnout and what that means and how to help people with that. So there you have it.
Mel and I were just chatting before we jumped on this call that we both have had overlapping experiences, kind of flirting with burnout again, and so it'll be interesting for us to talk about maybe why that's happening for both of us, and why I would predict that a lot of female physicians could likely relate. So, Erica, tell us about your story.
Well, I am a family physician also. And my story is similar yet a little different. I've been I was out of residency 9 years before I made the decision to leave my clinical practice 2 years ago. And I have a different perspective on it now, looking back, than I did at the time. And I think that's life for all of us, right? I have 3 children, and now looking back, I had postpartum depression with all 3 of my children. My first child was in the NICU, and I was right back to work right after that. My second child, I came home and it was just a struggle. And it wasn't until one of my partners totally called me out, God love her, and said, I have an appointment on my schedule for you today. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she totally saved me. And then the third one I was ready for. I knew it and I had accepted it. I didn't really want to admit that that was me. But I had always known towards the later part of my clinical practice that something was brewing. Like I knew there was a next step. And every time I went to kind of be like, all right, I'm ready for this new thing, the things that were offered to me were the path that everybody else has taken, right? And which I can only speak for myself, I guess, really good at following, right? Like I came out of undergrad, went to med school, all the way up, right? Climbed the chain of command in my organization, got offered these projects, these national projects, took them on, would go to these meetings, and people would look at me like, you're working for this organization? It's amazing. I can't believe you guys have all these resources. And meanwhile, I'm going, but I'm struggling. And yes, I have so much more than maybe your hospital system, but I'm struggling. And this is not like meeting what I want in my life. And that was really hard because on the surface and on paper, I had the best of best partners you could ever ask for. Like as a family med doc, they're just amazing people. The patients I took care of literally are like family to me. I even worked with my sister at the time as a fellow physician. And it was just this place of, this was a stepping stone. And even though to everybody else, it looked like I had made it, to me, it was a stepping stone. And so I ended up leaving my practice in 2018, thinking I was going to open a functional med practice because I'm functional med as well. And during all of that, I also started following Brooke Castillo and reading every other book you could imagine between Rachel Hollis and Jen Sincero, like everything you could imagine. And I ended up finding my coach through Life Coach School and really realized, this is what I want to do, which, I mean, let's face it, is the basis of family medicine, right? These like amazing, deep connected relationships with people. And so now I coach full time. That's what I'm kind of on the other end of the spectrum. It's been a journey. It's been interesting. A lot of identity work, which we can go into if you want. And my practice is centered on female physicians and other really high achieving, lay it all out in the line, sacrifice until you get to the finish line women who are ready and wanting to take that next step and totally shift that identity profile and go and create something from nothing. My tagline is creating the impossible. So that's what I do.
Love it. Love it. It's so awesome. It's funny because early in my journey, I kept hearing this name, Brooke Castillo, and I was like, what? Like, who is this person, right? And so I had started working with Sarah Smith, who is another Canadian physician coach who trained through the Life Coach School. She's on here right now. Hi, Sarah. I can see her. And it's so funny because I went to her because I thought, my problem was my family medicine practice, and I was never going to be able to get this thing under control. And there was something wrong with me and the way I practice medicine. And so I had reached out to Sarah because she's a charting coach. And I was like, I need some help, right? And so I started working with her. And at the same time, I kept hearing people talking about Brooke. And so I started listening to the Life Coach School podcast. And I can remember initially thinking to myself, like, this work it's not for somebody like me. But whenever I listen to her, I feel so much better. Like, this is for creative people, artsy people, people who want to do this coaching thing. Like, this isn't my life, right? And it's so funny, really, that things have come so full circle here now, just to, be here and be a coach in Brooke's training program, and just how much that journey has evolved, really, for me. I love listening to you guys talking about that, because so many of us have had Brooke make such a huge impact in our life. And, it's funny because it may not even happen like right off the start, just, kind of like it was for me, right? It took me quite a while before it really clicked for me that, this was really something. It wasn't just getting the coaching and in the charting world that was making a difference for me. It was the whole thing, right? How it was changing my life and my mind completely. So let's come back to burnout. I just want to start by sharing a few statistics. It really depends on what resource you go to figure out what the prevalence of burnout is, but it's likely quite high. When physicians self-disclose whether or not they feel burnt out, many studies will indicate that over 50% of doctors feel this way, and females seem to have a 45% higher likelihood of developing burnout. And so I've even heard people call this the new normal in medicine, which is really a very disturbing thing when you think about it. And why this is so important to me is because at the extreme end of burnout is mental health disorders and the risk of suicide, right? And female physicians have a 2.27 times higher risk of suicide. And, that you guys have seen me share on my Facebook before, that this is something that was definitely part of my journey. And, I think that we have an opportunity in doing this work, in taking our power back by using the most powerful computer that we have, which is our human brain. And so, when we look at burnout, people talk about three major things happening. They talk about emotional exhaustion, they talk about cynicism or feeling disconnected from the world, and they talk about this feeling of being ineffective or incapable of accomplishing anything. But I think there's more to this story as well, especially as it pertains to women. I think, there's a lot of other things that we might identify in women that could be early signs of burnout, or even late signs of burnout. So I'm wondering, Melissa and Erica, would you mind to comment on what you have seen in terms of burnout, and what you think female physicians might present with, maybe how they might recognize this in themselves?
That's a great question. For me, I was a pretty textbook case in terms of those three parameters that have been delineated: the cynicism, exhausted, and effective. I guess what was a giveaway for me was when I realized that I was just going through the motions, and I was still faking. Like, I was faking that everything was okay. And I can see women presenting that way frequently. Like, I'm fine, or I can figure this out, or maybe it's not as bad as I think it is. When in reality, I had no vision of a future. I didn't really have a sense of feeling alive, or thriving, or just that sense of peace that things are going to be okay. Like, it's okay. And to me, those are such important parts of the human experience, of a positive human experience, or that hope for the future and looking forward to things, and just feeling a spark and interest in things. And and I didn't feel empowered to be able to do what I wanted with my life. But yeah, it's acted like everything was fine. So I could see women doing that, presenting that way for sure. Yeah, everything's fine, but it's not. How about you, Erica?
Oh, hands down, I agree with everything you said. I think it's like a slow, faucet that's dripping, right? That's left on, and there's just this little drip, and every day a drip of you goes. And it's not until you get to this place, and I know for me, which I think I've shared with some of you is driving into work, legitimately contemplating driving my car off the road, like legitimately, or driving right past the exit and keep on going. Like I live in Ohio and I'm on the turnpike that takes me all the way west, and I could just keep going forever and never come back. I have 3 amazing kids, a wonderful husband who's also a physician who, you know, it's not as if, and it speaks the language of medicine, you know, so, and I have 2 sisters who are like, so it's not like I didn't have support, like, you know what I mean? But I think it's so subdued sometimes that you don't even see that it's really happening. And it's like insidious, I guess is the word to use. And we like are masters at making the world around us look great. Like how many times a day as a physician do we do this? 20 for some of us, 15 specialists, some of them 60. You know what I mean? Like where you walk in a room and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm this person. And you walk out. Oh, I'm this person. And you walk out. Oh, I'm that person. And you walk out. And you're like, well, who am I? Like, and you just get so, and then you come home and you do it for your family life. And then you go to your extended family life. And then you go to your church system or whatever it is, like, right. You get really good at that. And so I do agree with Mel. I think it's just this place where you just get tired of faking it. Like you literally get to the place where you're like, if this is as good as it's going to get, I can't do this anymore. And I do agree with you, Anna, like to be able to have, I know my journey was my journey for a reason and I honor that, but to be able to catch somebody before they get to that spot is like such a deep rooted passion of mine, because it is like the most isolated misery you could ever imagine. You have people around you that absolutely love you. I had coworkers who, it brings tears to my eyes. They genuinely wanted to help me. It wasn't as if I went and people turned me away. You know what I mean? But their solutions did not resonate with me. And so I guess I don't know if it's like I agree with Mel, like there's not a set criteria. They tell you those things, but how we present with it is just, but I think the key is that these conversations, at least were not in my awareness when I was at that place. And I am hopeful that the more we have these conversations, the more we pick up on it sooner, so that some of those ways to start picking up besides diagnostic criteria start to come to light a little bit more for other people.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I was frantically writing down a few notes as you guys were talking, just reflecting on things that I've seen through coaching women, but also, and certainly just listening to other women talk about their experiences with burnout, but also in my own. And I can remember just feeling like utterly disappointed to my core about medicine and about being a doctor. And yet it felt like it was my entire identity. Like I had lost, I remember I had joined a weight wellness program. And I remember like the coach asked me, what do you do as a hobby? What do you like to do? And I was like, I have no idea. Like I'm so detached from any identity. And this really, I realized how profoundly pathologic this was for me when I was on maternity leave, actually, because the entire time I was on maternity leave, I wanted to be back at work working because my entire identity was tied up in my job. I felt like I was no one when I was not a doctor, right? And I think this loss of vision, this loss of big picture, this loss of why we did this, what is meaningful to us in life, what brings us pleasure, what brings us joy, what brings us human connection. I think the loss of that is very profound in burnout, and I think it's very isolating. And just as you mentioned, Erica, how you felt that people were offering you help and wanted to help you, but it meant you couldn't see how that could be useful to you, right? I get the sense of this often for women who are experiencing burnout, when people are like, you need to take a vacation, you need to do some self-care. I can remember my colleagues offering me genuine help because they wanted to help me, but I felt it made me feel that much more isolated because I was like, nobody understands. Like nobody has any idea how profoundly this is affecting me, when they suggest to me that the solution is I just need to print out everything that's in my inbox so that I can scribble a signature on it all, and like that's going to solve the problem, right? And I remember feeling so angry. I would cry like tears of rage on my way home or when I was sitting in my office after work, you know. And another thing that I think is a telltale sign of this too is this like zoning out, you know, or like checking out or using some kind of substance, alcohol. I mean, you know, this is also one of the main reasons why physicians get in trouble with addictions as well. But I think even stuff like I can remember just getting home from work, flopping into a chair and like spending hours doing Sudoku on my cell phone because I was so spent. I was like, there's nothing left to be a mom. There's nothing left to cook a meal. There's nothing left to do the laundry. Like I just exist on this couch until it's time to go to bed, and then I go to bed. And that was my day-to-day life. So yeah, it's, you know, it can show up in a lot of different ways, and that's part of the reason why I asked you that question, because I think that sometimes we don't recognize that this is burnout, right? We think, you know, this is just an emotional reaction to something, or we think like we're too soft, or there's something wrong with us, or we just don't like medicine. And so, you know, it's very important, I think, to be able to recognize this. Thank you, Miriam, for sharing your experience in the comments. There's a couple people that have shared theirs as well, and I really appreciate that. And please feel free to write about your experiences there. We're here to listen as well and support. Okay, so let's talk about factors that contribute to burnout. What are you guys seeing in your practice, or what do you think happened for you in your own journeys?
Oh man, we could talk for 10 days about this. In my experience and some of the doctors I've talked to use a coach term or psychological term, resisting your emotions would come to like probably the top of what I think one of the contributors is. And I know that again was my experience personally. You guys said that people were reaching out to help you in your burnout. No one knew I was burned out. I still think most people have no idea that I was. No one would have thought anything was wrong. And I certainly didn't tell anyone anything was wrong. That was, you know, that was my thing that I thought I needed to, I guess, figure out or suppress it. And I think if someone had asked if something was wrong, I would have said no. Or if someone asked if they could help me, I definitely wouldn't have accepted it. That would have been seen as a sign of weakness at that point to me. So for me, it's not being aware of what I'm experiencing emotionally, and instead just repressing the discomfort to the point where I don't really know, I guess, who I am or what I'm experiencing that much. And that might look like what you said about the numbing out or just disconnecting. It's almost like floating above your life experience, like you see it happening, but there's not much emotional connection after a while. It's just, it doesn't feel good. It feels awful, but there's not much of an awareness of what emotions you might be experiencing if it weren't just this big bundle of awfulness. That was kind of what I thought it was. Like there was no nuance to it beyond that. So I think resisting our emotions and not understanding our emotions plays a big part. If we do that chronically, I think that is a big contributor to burnout.
So I'm going to go totally textbook on this and say a lot of it's your thoughts.
We're all laughing because Erica. That's like textbook in the coach world.
I know. This is textbook coaching answer.
The textbook is like all the systemic factors, right?
Right.
When we talk about burnout. So
here, let me tell you a story. I made the decision to leave my practice and in April, bawling as I'm telling my amazing partner, like I'm leaving, and he offered everything under the sun to get me to stay. You know what I mean? And so then I put in my notice and I left in July. My children are home. I have nothing going on. And I'm literally burning myself out about laundry, about everything else. My husband's like, Erica, I'm not trying to be rude right now, but nothing has changed. You're just not logging onto the computer all the time. And then it was like this really realization of, oh, Brooke might really be right. Like your thoughts, the way you think does create some of this stuff, right? So I ran on this programming that there was never enough time. I ran behind, which partially was great. I had, I had deep connections with my patients, but in my mind, I was never good enough because I was never on time. I was judged by those metrics of time, and time for me is huge. I've realized that now, and I know we'll talk about this in a little bit about dipping back into it. Happened last week, right? It's just the way that it works, right? So time, I think for many of us, especially us women who are balancing multiple things, is huge. And then when you get told, take more time for yourself, which is already the line of thought that's imprisoning you, is like just a double-edged layered sword on top of you that you're like, well, this is supposed to work for me. Okay, it's not working. It actually fuels the fire even more. And now what am I supposed to do? Right? Which then takes us back to, at least for me, my training of you work hard. You work hard no matter what. Like you show up, you don't get sick days, everything comes last. You come last, everything comes first. And so it's just this like cyclical thing for me that was almost just like, it was like a spiral, truly. And I think for me, it was my relationship with time. And I do think that that's partially internal, right? Which we get to this place now that I can look back and say that. At the time, oh no. That was too many people on my schedule, highly complex patients, switching to an accountable care organization that required, all these quality metrics, which was great from a patient perspective, but how am I managing this? And now I'm a leader of a multifaceted team approach with not much time to deliver that kind of communication to my team and lead them the way that I want and teach them the way that I'd like. So it just all meshes together, right? And then you find the story that feeds that internal thing, right? Which we could all sit here and talk about some of these things. And there's probably a lot of facts in there, but the truth is we then latch onto that, right? And I think a lot like Mel, what that ended up making happen for me was just a total numbing. Like I wouldn't even laugh at my kids. It was heartbreaking. I was actually looking at pictures with my kids 2 nights ago because they wanted to see baby pictures of themselves, and I don't remember them. Like, honest to God, don't remember them. And I know I have compassion for myself now. I know it was because of where my mind was. And I was always working and I was always logged out. I mean, I would get up at 3:30 in the morning, work for 3 hours, go in to see patients, come home and do dinner, get back on the computer. It was just this constant thing. I needed Sarah Smith at the time, actually. But you know what I mean? So I think that but when I looked around me, other women were doing the same thing. And I valued them, and they were respected colleagues and friends and top of their specialties, you know what I mean? And making it look easy too. And so it's kind of this thing where you can't really fault yourself, but there is an awareness that happens for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a cultural thing in medicine, right? There's a cultural thing where we get real good at suppressing our emotions. I think we get real good at swapping back and forth the stories about how the problem is the systemic factors and the admin requirements and the call and the long working hours and the patient loads and all those kind of things, but it's so disempowering. And so I loved how you called it the textbook, because it's the textbook in the coaching world, right? But the textbook in a lot of the burnout literature is like there's so many systemic factors, right? And these things are very real things that we need to take into consideration. But in order to see what we want to change, right, and to make that decision, we need to come from a place where we realize the power of our human mind first to be able to decide, does anything need to change? Or does my perspective need to shift, right? And I think that that's what we do as coaches. I made this, you guys won't be able to see this very well, but I made this last night, and this is my little my little burnout schematic. But there's a ton of things on here, right? And you guys touched on a lot of them, which is amazing. I think physicians, we act so often from fear, obligation, guilt, right? It's like we think that we're going to get sued if we don't do certain things. We think that, people demand things of us, and that if we don't do them, then patients are going to complain. They're not going to come back and see us. We want to be perfect. We hold ourselves to these unattainable standards. I think, we have this imposter syndrome where we're like, somebody's going to find out any day that I'm not good enough to be sitting in this job and doing this role. And that just drives us harder and harder and harder. We have family responsibilities. We just operate constantly in this system of fear, obligation, and guilt. I think a lot of doctors are really horrible at managing their businesses. This is what Sarah taught me how to do, right? Look at my family practice as a business, decide I'm an employee of it, look at how much I want to work in my business, right? All these things that really unlocked so much freedom to me when I started to look at my job in such a different light, right? When it stopped being my identity and it started being a job that I do. Inability to set boundaries, right? Poor time management, people pleasing, multitasking, always thinking we can do more than one thing at once, right? And then we get nothing done. Time scarcity, money scarcity, feeling, pressure to be doing things for money. Gender biases, right? And then we buy into that. We're like, okay, well, I'm supposed to behave a certain way. I'm supposed to act a certain way. If I do too much of this, then somebody's going to say I'm too direct. If I do too much of this, somebody's going to say I'm not direct enough. It's this constant need to try to fit into a certain box, right? And then, as Mal, you talked about, we lose sight of our goals and our priorities and our vision. We don't honor commitments to ourselves anymore. We don't know who we are. We don't remember why we went into this. We have no purpose anymore, right? We're just like a cog in the wheel. Like, I remember sitting in this office and feeling like the walls were closing in on me, and I was so stuck. That could be another sign, right, of burnout, feeling like you're stuck. I think all of these things factor into this. And the best part about it, when we look at burnout from this broader perspective, is that it's not just like everything is based in the systemic factors that are so hard to change. It becomes something we can work on an individual level so that we can feel better and we can enjoy our lives more, which is totally why I fell in love with coaching. And I bet you too can echo that same sort of sentiment, because it is powerful work. Okay, so why is it important that we recognize this and we manage this? Like, what do you guys see as being the risks of unmanaged burnout? Unrecognized burnout.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, and what you both brought up, I mean, the wanting to not be alive anymore. I mean, that's, to me, one end of the spectrum of heartbreaking with burnout and a possible consequence and risk of it. And I don't know where I would be now had I not, 2.5, 3 years ago, stumbled across life coaching concepts that helped me. I don't know. I don't know what the risk would have been to me, but I know, in a sense, as painful as burnout was, and I truly use the word suffering even for that, there was a part of me that I think still believed that I was like fine, like even if life was always like this, like somehow I guess I could tolerate it, I guess. And maybe that would have changed over time. It might have, I don't know. But at the very least, not recognizing and addressing burnout just leads to a life experience that it's just not what it could be, I suppose. I just keep thinking of the word thriving or just alive. Like it's burnout is like being alive, but without the candle, and without a light burning inside of you. A little bit like a carcass or a skeleton, I guess. And it's amazing how effective we even could be in burnout, right? I mean, we held our jobs down, and even though I knew what I was experiencing in my head with patients, how cynical and judgmental, and everyone was stupid and everyone was wrong and everyone was bringing dumb problems in. But again, I don't think anyone would have really known that. Like maybe I didn't come across as like fun and boisterous, but I was effective and good enough at my job to get the job done. So the life experience is just it's just, I guess, dim. And again, I don't like to judge a life experience. Like if someone goes through their whole life feeling burned out, that was their life, and that's okay. But I love now having experienced non-burnout, and I'm so grateful for that, and just think we all have that potential to move through burnout and live with more of that spark and fire and joy and hope and empowerment. So that's what I got.
Yeah. I know for me, I can echo everything Mel just said. I might have actually done it. Like I might have actually driven my car off the road. I think for me, part of where I was that I was resisting a pull to move on, to create more, because my identity was so tied to the awesome organization I worked with, my patience, how I was known in the community. All of those things feed our ego, especially when we work really hard to get there. You know what I mean? And you still have hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt that you're still paying off because you got there, right? And so for me, where I got to was a total surrender and on my knees and praying, and this place where, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't fully know what comes next, but I have faith that it's going to be good. And in that, I was able to start flipping the question upside down. Instead of, I can't do this anymore, like, how can I keep doing this, to what if I don't fix this? Like what you just asked, what am I losing out on? And it did come to me, the same thing that you guys just alluded to with, which is one of my greatest fascinations. If I can exist like this, running on empty, and I'm nailing quality metrics, and I'm nailing the supposed mom thing, right? And I've got this all nailed. What am I capable of, right? Because for many people, they look at us as physicians and they're like, you've made it. You've hit the top. Like, you did it. And similar to Mel, that's wonderful for a lot of people, right? But for some of us, we're like, what if this is just the starting point? You know what I mean? Like, what if? And that question, I have to be truthful, Brooke Castillo's work helped me see that a lot. That asking yourself the question of, what if there's more than this? Which is also a gut-wrenching question, because the answers that came to me were, then you need to move on. It's time. And frankly, it was one of my patients who looked me in the eye and told me that. Like, it's time for you. Like, it's time for you. You've done your work here. It's time for you to move. And I know it's just my journey, but I think that it's begging this question for any of us, right? What are we missing out on? And is it worth the cost to stay in that place where everything feels so gray? Like, how much is it worth? Like, I always love the Wizard of Oz analogy, like, where then you go into this vibrant, colorful world and you get to choose what your life is like. Whether that's the same, like, Anna, you're saying the same patients, but you choose every day how your day is, right? It doesn't make a difference with the we know this, but it doesn't make a difference with the circumstance. It's the point that you choose color over gray, right? That's the point. And that you choose the journey to get to the color. So that's my long-winded answer to you. Sorry.
Yeah, I love that you say that, though. And, it's both of you are saying something very similar, right? It's that if you don't manage this, you don't have this opportunity to experience this full human experience in your life, right? The joy and the pleasure. And when you focus some of your effort and your mind on achieving that for yourself, right? It's like you unlock this part of your brain. I call it, it's like we increase our bandwidth, right? Like, all of a sudden, things we never thought we would ever do in our life. I never imagined before February that I would be a life coach. Like, it's just like never would have happened for me, right? And I still love doing medicine, but I can love doing medicine again because I have done the steps to manage this problem in my life. And yes, I think it is really about that, right? It's about missing out on the full experience of your own human life if you don't detect that this is in your life and do something about it. Okay, so we talked a bit about what we can control, what we can't control, and I think there's a lot of people right now who feel like it's really hard to control stuff in their life because of COVID, and that their burnout is related to external things. And so I'm really interested in what you guys have to say about that. Erica, you kind of started talking about that a little bit. Do you want to run with that a bit?
Yeah. To answer that, I think I have to look back to where I was, a year and a half, 2 years ago, and how I got to this place. I am a huge fan, and I know I'm using some coaching lingo, I hope that's okay, Anna, of the concept of future self. And it mirrors what Mel said about you lose the vision, right? So our future self is this idea that there's this version of us, future state. And I know now the version of me today is what got me on my knees 2 years ago. Because I have the office now I dreamt of. I have the day I dreamt. She pulled me. I know my energy of today pulled me and told me not to drive off that road. I know that with all my heart. And I know that there's a future state of me pulling me now, right? And so I think when we start this journey, there's a little bit of trust, right? There's a little trust that has to happen, maybe not a little, a lot of trust and faith that has to happen, that the small, tiny things really add up. And I started my journey before I made my decision of just getting 5 minutes of yoga in before I would go to work. 5 minutes. That's all that's really what I could literally manage myself to get in it. My brain was still spinning like a mile a minute when I did it, but I did it. And then I managed that when I drove into work, I started listening to a podcast of some kind that I fed my soul. And then I managed, right? And so it's this idea that you just start feeding yourself with nourishment. You start filling the tank back up. Of course, we all want the tank to go from empty to full overnight. And that doesn't always happen. But in that process, you start to become more and more aware of the things that you can control and the things that maybe you don't even really care about anymore, that aren't really in your control anyway. And you start taking ownership of that. So I think for me, knowing that there is this future version of me, hearing that concept was like, oh, I have faith. I know that this is going to be good. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I have faith. And right now, my work of today is to listen to that podcast. My work of today is to hug my kid. My work of today is to journal for 5 minutes. Nothing fancy, nothing crazy, and just layer that. And now that's evolved over time, but I think, and I still do those things. I do them in the same routines that I did then. Maybe a little bit more of time now, maybe a different perspective on it, but it's this idea that I start to come first. And I make that choice that I come first, even if it's for 5 minutes, maybe 30 seconds some days, right? And I know that doesn't seem like, and at the time I totally balked at that idea, but I had faith and I kept going. I'd be like, oh, that's never going to work. But yeah, I still did it for 5 minutes. I'm like, oh, that's never going to work. And then I did it for 10 minutes, right? And so you just keep adding up and adding up. And of course, getting my own coach just lit the world on fire, right? So it took all of that and then just amplified it. And I think that even in times like now, even any of us sitting here, we had circumstances over the past couple of months that we can't control. And it's always going back to basics, right? It's the fundamentals of anything is where you find your strength. And for me, after I kind of flipped out and had a breakdown early on in this whole COVID time, right? Had to cry, process this, and then it's okay, it's back to basics. How do I feed my soul? How do I nourish myself and my family? And you get really good at knowing what you need and how you're going to give it to yourself, and that comes first.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Erica.
Mhm.
I echo all that so much, and I wanted to comment a little bit, if anyone else resonates with being like just a resistor of uncomfortable feelings. That one thing we can start to gain control over is how we respond to our feelings, and it's really uncomfortable if anyone experiences feelings like I do, which is basically something uncomfortable comes up and it's immediately squash it down. Like, no, thank you. And so practicing just how you respond to feelings, and I think it has to start with allowing yourself to experience anything and opening up to anything. And I'm here, I'm present. Come over me, what's going to come over me, and learn to sit with it. So the one thing we could have practice control over is how we respond to our emotions and opening up to them. And then the other thing is recognizing the stories that we are telling ourselves and adjusting our stories as needed. And Anna, one thing you said earlier, you were talking about doctors living a lot of times out of fear of a lawsuit or fear of a patient complaint or fear of a poor outcome. And it always strikes me that those things are true, right? Like a misstep or not even a misstep could lead to a lawsuit or a patient complaint or a poor outcome in a patient. And recognizing that those things may be true, but that living from just the story of that being true wasn't useful in my life, because that was a fear-based energy, and living from fear didn't feel good, wasn't very effective, and contributed to burnout for sure. So what other stories can we tell about this being our career, that we've chosen a career where these could be outcomes, and how do we want to approach that? How can we wrap our heads around that and live with that, and tell ourselves stories that lead to a more empowering and I guess just effective and positive existence, even knowing that.
Yeah, I love that you say that, because, you know, I think that's it, right? Is it's like we create this pain and suffering because we're afraid of things happening that aren't even really happening in our life, right? So it's almost like we create the exact same emotional experience for us. But the fascinating thing about that is we then act from that place, and we're more likely to make errors. We're more likely to miss things. We're more likely to have blinders on, right? We're more likely to be caught up in a limiting belief and not able to see other things when we're in that space. So it's fascinating how sometimes it even becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in some ways for us, right? But awesome. This is awesome. Like, I had written down a few things that I thought were kind of helpful little takeaway points from this talk that people could use in terms of if they're feeling burned out and trying to really figure out what's going on for themselves. And so I loved that both Mel and Erica talked about writing stuff down. I think it's really helpful to write out what's in your mind about your work and your life, and just write it all out, right? And don't edit it, don't hold anything back, don't judge it even as it's coming out. Just write it all out and then put it away and leave it for like 10 or 15 minutes, and then go back and take a look and really just look at what's going on for you in your life, right? I think you'll find that a lot of what's happening for you when you're in that place is thoughts that you're having about what's going on in your life. I love that Mel talked about learning how to hold space for our own emotions and to feel whatever we need to feel. I really like this tool called the emotional wheel. When I started doing this work, I thought I had two emotions, and they were anxious and overwhelmed. And I literally thought that those were the only things that I ever felt, ever. And so I had just really forgotten about the breadth of human emotion. And getting an emotional wheel has been really cool for me in terms of trying to expand my vocabulary of what I'm feeling in the moment. And really starting to get curious about, like, what does shame feel like in my body? What does sadness feel like in my body? I think it's an interesting process when we do that, because it really does create, like Mal was saying, this space where you don't feel quite as afraid to experience an emotion anymore. And most of the time, the act of suppressing our emotions, which is what we so often do in medicine, actually creates more angst, more pain. It prolongs the whole experience for us. So it's fascinating. Then my third thing was I love the exercise of writing down everything that's a priority for us in our life. And then I ask my clients, I learned this from Brooke, I ask my clients to really take it and narrow it down to 5 things, because that's like the most we can really manage to put our attention into. And so some of them are going to overlap, right? And they're going to fit into the same umbrella sort of category. But when you know what your priorities are for your life, like what really matters to you in the big picture of your life, and then you take a look at your actual life and you see, like, is what I'm doing in my life congruent with what matters to me, or is it not? It is such a profound exercise to do in terms of understanding why you feel badly, right? Why you feel uncomfortable, why you're experiencing burnout. And then my fourth piece is to figure out what your own individual pillars of health are for yourself. Like, what do you need to function well? It's often not that we need this like massive quantity of time. It's that there are critical things for ourselves. You know, for me, I have to sleep a certain amount every night. If I neglect that and I let that go, I slip. We were talking before about burnout relapse, right? I slip back into that place because I can no longer use all of my brain's bandwidth to remember, like, what's the big picture for me. I get caught up in that time scarcity and that, you know, to-do list that's too long if I don't do that. So sleep, it's critical for me. I like to exercise. I like to eat well. You know, I like to have some time where I'm like focused and present with my family. These are all sort of pillars for me to feel like a whole person. And like, I like to spend some time outdoors. I like a little bit of time alone, right? And it's amazing when I actually think about those things and what's really, really critical to my well-being and my success in life, that if I recognize that, and I recognize that I'm a better doctor, I'm a better coach, I'm a better mom when I do those things, then suddenly they become important things to put on my schedule. And whenever I find myself forgetting to put those on my schedule, forgetting to make those commitments, right? Forgetting to treat them as if they were the equivalent of an appointment that I had with a patient at my office, right? Which I would never flake on and not show up for. I'd have to be like sick on my deathbed, right? When I look at those and I really think about those things as being the same, then my life changes. It changes phenomenally. And, you know, I think that you guys will probably agree that these are such critical things. It's not the what we do, but it's the intention that we have, right? It's knowing that if we do those things, if we prioritize those things, if we think about ourselves as being our priority, right? Something that we have to look after so that we can be better at everything else we do, then suddenly we experience this emotional shift and everything sort of starts to fall into place, right? It's like we can use our brain to figure out how we're going to make the pieces of the puzzle fit together. What do you guys think?
Oh, I totally agree. Hands down. I think it's this thing, you know, it's the true definition of self-love. Mm-hmm. It's like radical self-love. And it took me a long time to understand that. And because I'm a giver, I'm a people pleaser, my identity as physician is calling, right? There's a spiritual component to it for me. Mm-hmm. And so when that language was offered to me, I kind of resisted it for a while, to be very truthful. And I know now why, because the minute I would latch onto that is the minute everything would change. And it did, right? Because it takes a little time, but gradually your tank gets fuller and fuller. And I love the Wayne Dyer quote that, and I don't know it specifically, but the paraphrasing is like, you can't be ill enough to help somebody who's sick, right? You can't be poor enough to help somebody out of poverty. You can't, you know, it's that concept, like you can't give away everything and then expect to help somebody. And I really didn't believe that because I thought my job was to show up and give, right? Serving leaders, service of others, these words that are tossed around that we take such pride in, you know? But the cost of that was my life. And I realized, okay, this is not how it's meant to be. Like, this is a benevolent process, right? You're given gifts and talents to make it through med school and residency and to connect with the patient. And it's supposed to, like, somebody says, it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be energizing to you. You're supposed to have this reciprocal energy return if you start. And I'm like, there's got to be something I'm missing here. And the piece that I missed was that, oh, I can do this in a way that I totally feel good too. Like, that's like mind blowing, right? Because when you start to realize that, your life opens up. Then the work begins, because now every chance you get, your brain fights you a little bit. And that's the work that you're talking about. So you're like, you just keep doing it. You just keep making, or Susan, Anna, you just keep making that decision and that decision and that decision. And eventually it just becomes what is, right? Like, it is for me that every day I wake up and I write, right? That is like a non-negotiable. It just happens. It just is my life, because I've just over time just made it my life. That was not the case 2 years ago, let me tell you. You know what I mean? So I think it's just a gradual process of choosing you.
Yeah, I agree so much. And I'm glad you used the word radical self-love. I think that's the phrase you used, and self-acceptance. Those are terms that I used to scoff at and roll my eyes at. Like, come on, like, could we get more woo and fruity and self-helpy and like hugging ourselves and self-love? And I am still exploring a little bit why I'm so naturally averse to that. But I think it's in part because I've had this deep belief that I need to earn love, that I have to do something to like be worthy of like love and acceptance. And I'm definitely still exploring that. And I think some of that might be why burnout started to creep up again. So I was trying to like earn my way to like that self-acceptance and love that I had like gotten to a place of embracing. Maybe like when I first was into going through coaching techniques and whatnot. And then that had started to like chip away again, where it started to creep up that I need to earn that. But that's truly what the goal, I think, of all this is to get to that place of radical self-acceptance. And use whatever word you like for that: love, acceptance, belonging, that you're worthy, like all of those terms. I think if we get to a place of that, then the world's our oyster, seriously. And I think that's what, at least I think all of this culminates in that being the kind of the goal, and then let life unfold and bring it on and see what happens. Yeah,
totally. I love that you say that, because you know, I think one of the misconceptions maybe when you start doing coaching work or working on any of this stuff is that it's not a lifelong work in progress, right? And I think that the solution is being intentional and managing our mind going forward for life, right? Because the thing is this happens because we have a human brain, and when we learn how to manage our human brain, then we can change our life, and our life can become something incredible. But it doesn't mean that we can just stop managing our human brain. And when we start to do that, and we start to, you know, let that slip, and we lose sight of that, right? That's when we start to notice this reoccurring. And I think it's the reason why this is so pervasive and why it happens that people experience multiple burnouts. But the beauty, I mean, for me, speaking from my personal experience, this last couple of weeks, I've been noticing this has been creeping back in for me. But I sat down and I used my coaching skills, right? I used my ability to coach myself to realize that I am deviating from the pillars that I need to stay healthy and well and not be burned out, right? And the beauty of it is that you then start to recognize this so much earlier in yourself, that it's such a powerful thing, right? You don't get to that point that you're going to drive your car, off the road, right? That you're going to go in the treatment room and commit suicide. You don't get to that point anymore. You get to the point where you're like, something is not right in my life, because I'm noticing that my emotions are shifting, because I'm in tune with my emotions. I see that there's an internal shift, right? And then you have the power to intervene in your life. But this is part of human life. It was never meant to be that there weren't going to be ups and downs, and we weren't going to experience sometimes negative things, right? But it's that we can see how we can learn from them, where the power is, I think.
Totally.
Well, thank you to you both. We're on an hour here, so I think we, yes, Jenny, I see you. It will be on my Facebook page, so yes, you can come back and watch it. And if anybody comes back and watches the replay, drop a hashtag replay, because more people will see this video that way. But thank you so much, Melissa and Erica. I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure everybody who's watched this has as well. And I just want to ask you guys if you have any kind of closing thoughts, or if you want to mention where people can connect with you on Facebook or elsewhere.
Yeah, so because I've re-experienced some burnout here this past year, my first thought was, if you're finding yourself feeling that way, to not panic and take a deep breath and breathe. It's going to be okay. But do make yourself a priority, and life can get better, and go find some help, whatever resonates with you. I have a private Facebook page called Physicians Inspired, and then I have a website as well, physiciansinspired.com, where you can come find me for coaching. And I also have a blog there. And I think those are my places to find me. Oh, and email, coachwithmelissa@gmail.com.
Cool. I second all of those things that they all said. It is human wiring to always be, and I think especially us high achievers, we love growth, right? This is what we do. We love challenge. And I think there is a way to learn how to go through a challenge and totally have your own back and be totally full of energy and light and love, and see what you're capable of, and just know that those things are possible. They might not be seeming real in your reality right now, but they're possible. And I just have this, I don't know, true, just deep down at my core belief that those of us who have been called to a healing profession, you have a gift. There's a reason you are here. And to really just have faith that it will pull you further than you know. It will help you find the help. It will come across your path like it did for me. You'll meet amazing people like I have in my life right now. These two women, you will find support, and just know that it's going to be good. It may not look like that on the surface at first, but it will be. And that you have the wind at your back, and more people are around to help. And it doesn't have to be that you have to go ask for it. You can find it. I mean, I found help in just listening to podcasts. I was anonymous at that point. I kind of hid under the radar, right? But they helped me. And it helped me get to the place where I was ready then to say, no, like, I'm choosing me now. And I'm going to step up and into the light, and I'm going to choose me. And so however your journey unfolds for you, just know that you are an amazing healer. There's no way in my mind you would not be where you are. And your patients, I'm sure, adore you. I don't even know who you are out there, but I just know that as a fact. And so I also too have a private Facebook group. It's called Rock Stars of the Awakening Tide. It's built in the lens of this idea of growth and creating growth in our life through the lens of love. And you can find me at my website too, theawakeningtide.com.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their Sunday. And please, as always, feel free to write us some comments or reach out or send us a private message. I think most of you guys who might be watching are familiar with my stuff, but certainly the links to my Facebook group and my website are in my bio. And yes, please share this far and wide if you got something from this. We definitely want to reach out to as many people as we can and hopefully share some hope that things can get better. Okay, take care, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.